crazy you mention how badly he set up Kamala Harris, right? Especially after we've seen the internal polling that showed him with like George McGovern numbers. I mean, he was going to get absolutely curb stomped. He was going to win Delaware, Washington. He might have lost California. It was all up in the air. It was real, really miserable internal polling, and he really couldn't sink his teeth into any policy. A lot of people will point to Build Back Better. A lot of people will point to the CHIPS Act. Those are very amorphous things that don't really benefit people in America. Honestly, Donald Trump is going to have way more success taking credit for Build Back Better now that it's a few
Right.
years down the line and things are actually going to start to materialize for the American people, and then they'll just assume Donald Trump did it, right? One of the things that I found really surprising from the Democratic Party, something that Joe Biden pretended during the 2020 primaries that he was willing to embrace, but then completely abandoned, as did much of the Democratic Party from a rhetorical standpoint. And that is their messaging on climate change, something
Mm,
that's been kind of thrust back into the conversation in the wake of the California fires. Of course, we also had the dramatic hurricanes that devastated North Carolina. And we had Kyle on the show the other day, and we were reacting to Joe Rogan and Mel Gibson talk about how it was actually a green energy scam and how there's no proof that humans burning fossil fuels and emitting carbon is actually the cause of climate change, which is a huge regression for a guy like Joe Rogan, who used to have the Vice climate reporters on all the time. He used to talk about how the
mhm.
ice caps were melting all the time. It was actually one of the positive, informative elements of his show for a while. He was really into that. And that's completely gone. And it seems like that was an easy winner for the Democrats, but they're refusing to message on it. What do you think about that? And do you think they're going to learn from that and embrace it moving forward?
I mean, man, I think, it's funny because Kamala Harris co-sponsored the Green New Deal, then ran away from it in this election. She was a co-sponsor of Medicare for All because she tried to run in 2020 as somebody who could be a halfway point between Bernie and Biden. It was always those two guys. And everybody else, I mean, Warren maybe, but everybody else was positioning themselves as a way to like, how can I be progressive and get the base, but also not be that? And she was one of those folks who kind of then had to in this race because the consultant class ran this campaign more than I feel like I've seen anybody because she never had the cachet or power or legitimacy, I feel like, to demand what she wanted out of the campaign. She just basically went with whatever these consultants were telling her. They saw it as a liability at that point. So like how many times do we hear about frickin' fracking? And how horrible it is that Kamala Harris may have wanted to ban fracking at one point in her career. Um, yeah, I think that that the conversation around that topic regressed. I do think that there is an opportunity in 2028 to revive some of the Green New Deal type ideas, basically making it about making our economy grow more resilient in that way, and also combating the threat of climate change. But the reality is that the way that Biden and he did pass the biggest climate bill, but it's a lot through a series of tax credits and things like that, and incentives for business. We need to be going in the model of like what New York State is trying to do, public renewables. That I think is the future, and it will be a differentiator when we have a presidential race in 2028 of who's really serious about this and who just kind of wants to create more incentives for private industry, which is not going to solve this. Like the way that we could actually solve climate change is nationalizing the oil and gas industry. And we're not even anywhere close to that political reality here. We need to nationalize them and then deconstruct them because they are killing all of us, all of this. But um all of us. But to get back to your point, I do think Biden dropped the ball on this, but he dropped the ball on a lot of things, right? Like he could have sold some of the climate pieces of legislation that he passed, but he was unable to communicate. And I think I bring it back to like what we were saying earlier and what we were talking about is the leadership vacuum that he left by being unable to like literally speak and use the bully pulpit of the presidency. We see how Trump is just able to cut through everything with his direct communication style. And even if it's unorthodox and even if it sounds ridiculous and is 90% lies, people have an inherent feeling that he's communicating to them in a more modern sense than Biden just standing behind the podium and mumbling something. Like, what was the core brand of the party that Biden embodied? Can you say? Can anyone figure it out? You could say for Trump, immigration, um, going after immigrants, and basically gutting the administrative state. That's what he wants to do, cutting taxes for the rich, the economy, whatever. What was the core brand proposition of the Democrats? And I think that was a leadership failure on Joe Biden's part. He was unable to communicate those kinds of things. So there was no um it's also why AOC, you saw that her losses in her district were not that of the other Democrats in the rest of the state, because she also has this direct communication style where people feel like they can relate to her. And then you had crossover Trump voters who also voted for her as well. So I do think that the Democrats also need to abandon, again, this like right wing consultant class kind of style of politics, but also just in terms of communicating, you know, stop going to the legacy media. Talk directly to people, because everybody that's consuming the legacy media, they're already voting for you. And like that, in the same way that the Liz Cheney thing like was such a disaster. Everybody that knows that Liz Cheney, Liz Cheney with that last name, was against Trump trying to overturn the results of the 2020 election. Everybody that knows that fact is already voting for Kamala Harris because they're already consuming a lot of news media. When regular people hear the last name Cheney, do you know what they think?